And welcome back, students. As we dive into our next animation lesson, today we are going to explore Photoshop. Now, Photoshop, as I mentioned previously, is a tool that we can use to create pixel art. It is not the only tool that is capable of doing so. In fact, there are many other free tools out there that you can use to create pixel art. However, it is the tool that we're going to be looking at in this course. So with that being said, let's dive right in. Now, if you have never worked with Photoshop before, the first time you open up, you might see a screen such as this. And here you'll have a couple of buttons along the sidebar. You might even see some thumbnails here for images that you've opened. If you've never opened anything, you may not have anything down here. That's okay. They do also open up the suggestions window. You're welcome to click on Hide Suggestions to cover that up. But what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and jump right into File. Now, if you don't have this new file option, you can also come over here to File and then click on New. Both of those are going to get you the exact same window. All right, now this new document format here is going to give you a couple different options. Now, because we're working with pixel art, we're going to want to look at something either like art and illustration or web. Now, in here, of course, if you look at art and illustration, you can see we have pixel grids. But what we actually probably want to look for is a web, because you can see here we have that familiar pixel measurements. All right, so for example, this is a web most common. It is 1366 by 768 pixels. And that's good, but let's just go ahead and, for our purposes, I'm just going to go ahead and scale this down just for demonstration purposes. I'm going to go ahead and just make this 400 by 400 pixels just so we have something a little bit smaller to look at. Now, the big thing I will warn you is to make sure you check this box right here. All right. Very often I'll see students, they'll have on something like, for example, like photo, and they'll leave it, they'll come in here, oh, I want a 400 by 400 image, right? So they go and change it 400 by 400. But if you look right here, our measurements are not in pixels, they're in inches. And so you end up with this very large image. That's not what we want. So that's why I usually default to web, because it will automatically change that to pixels for me. So I do not have to worry about that, but it is always good still to double check that. Next, you have the options of orientation. So you have portrait and landscape. By default, we're going to leave this in landscape because that's going to make our width run longer than our height. There's also this option to include artboards. Now, artboards, of course, are like little canvases that you can use for your image. You can uncheck that. It's not going to cause any problems. Don't have to worry about a resolution. You can just leave it as it is. You also have color mode. Color mode is something that allows you to choose how your colors are going to be. So, for example, you have bitmap, grayscale, RGB, CMYK, which is used more for print, and lab color. We're going to leave it on RGB. Now, this is one thing you might want to look at, though, is background contents. All right, this is saying, what do you want to fill the background color with? Do you want to fill it with white, black, a particular color, transparent, or custom? For our purposes, starting out, let's just go ahead and make this transparent because we are going to want to eventually create images that we can, for example, go and make into GIFs. And if we make them into GIFs, well, we are going to want to make sure that we do not have any background that we have to deal with. Now, of course, we can leave that in there. We can do white, for example, and fill that in. But for our purposes, let's just go ahead and choose transparent. The rest of this is fine to kind of leave as is. And then we're going ahead and click create. And of course, now I have my image here. This, of course, is at 1366 by 768 because remember, it defaulted back. If I said, oops, this is not the size I want because I just created this image, I can, of course, just come up here and go File, Close. It will close that image, doesn't save it. And then if I go back to my web here and I say, I want this 400 by 400, I can easily do that. And notice, because these are the same, the orientation defaults to portrait. If I make this 600 by 400, you can see that it has now made it into the landscape. So here's my image, and you notice now this time I made it with an artboard. If for whatever reason you do this and you're like, oh no, I made an artboard, you can, of course, remove artboards out of here. You have that option. Or if you, again, have just started, you can also hit this little X right here. It'll prompt you if you want to save changes. I'm just going to choose no for now. And if we go back, I'm going to do our 600 by 400 again. Change it to transparent, no artboard, create, and here's our image. Oh, I don't think I quite created that correctly. That's okay. it is perfectly easy to do that. Yep, I did 100 here. There we go. Now, of course, you have different tools available to you here in Photoshop. All right, right now you can see that I have the zoom tool selected. And with the zoom tool, that allows me to zoom in and out of a canvas pretty easy. I can either click and hold to drag, or I can also single click to move in. Now, if you ever need to reset your image, if you hold down Control+0, that will reset it to be the center of your image. Now you say, well, this is still a little bit close. I want to zoom out a little bit, for example. If you right now, because I'm on the zoom key, if I hold down Alt, you'll see that my magnification lens changes to that of a minus sign. So then if I click, it will zoom out a little bit more. Now the other important tools that we'll need to know, and we'll talk about these a little bit more in depth as we move through Photoshop, is first off, you have the move tool. This is very handy for when you have something in your image here. You can easily come and click on that and drag it around. So for example, let's just say I'm going to come in here. I have so many different tools and options here, but if I have, instead of, see if we can find shape here. Here we go. So I'm just going to make a quick shape. Here's a rectangle. Use my move tool. I can now move that around freely. The other thing, of course, is your selection tool. And there are, of course, different selections that we have in here. Most common ones you'll see is probably the rectangular marquee. Allows me to come and make a selection drag. So for example, I can select this section of the rectangle. And from there, I can make edits. Now, we also have other things like lasso select, magnetic select, and we'll talk about some of these tools as we dive into the various features of Photoshop. Gradients are something that you might see us do a little bit with, but usually not too often. Paint bucket tool, really helpful for if you want to do a fill. Now you notice I can't, for example, on the paint bucket, click right on the shape because it's telling me you have to rasterize this. So if I go back to my move tool, here's my rectangle, right? I'm going to click off of the selection. This is another thing to point out. If you have a selection, you want to get off it, just use your rectangular marquee tool, click off the canvas, and then you'll be able to easily change it. Now, of course, this rectangle doesn't have any controls set to it. Again, if I try to click on this, you can see right now it's filling in with black. That's because my colors are still set to black and white here. So if I ever want to change a color, just double click, do red, for example, and now I've made a rectangle. All right. Again, very basic tools that we'll need to know, and we'll get into a lot more things as we get into here. Text is right here. We have, again, the shape tools right here. We can do ellipses, triangles, etc. And over here, the last thing I want to point out is the layers panel. All right. Again, we'll get into Photoshop pretty in depth as we go into this class, but I want to point out the layers panel. If you haven't worked with layered images before, this is a great time to get to know these. Because unlike, for example, something like Paint, which does everything on a single layer, if I were to come in here and say, hey, you know, I need another layer. I click New Layer, makes a layer. And let's just say I'm going to now make a shape. But let's say instead of a red shape, I want to make this one to be, let's say we want to do a blue. Okay, so I'm going to do a blue one. And I'm going to just draw that in place. All right, now in normal tools like Paint, this would now be transformed. So there would be a red section, a blue section, and a red section. And if I were to grab this in Paint and try to move it around, it would pretty much move the whole object. However, because these are in layers, if I grab this shape here, you can see that it moves the blue without affecting the red. And if I grab the red, it will move it without affecting the blue. It allows me to keep each object isolated to its own set of editing. All right, and that's where we're going to stop here today. Again, just a quick overview of some of the different things in Photoshop. There's a lot of stuff to talk about, but just wanted to make sure that we get that. The last thing I'm going to show you before we leave today is how to save and export. So if I want to save this, so let's just say I want to save this image. I can go up here and go to File, and I go to Save. All right, and that gives me the option, for example, to save to Creative Cloud. If you have this, if it doesn't, it might just go right to your computer. I'm just going to hit Save Computer and don't show again. All right, and I'm just going to put this in downloads. That's fine. And I'm just going to call this Shape. So there's my Shapes document. I hit Save. Click OK. And you will see that this has been updated to say shapes.psd. So if I were to go and look in my downloads folder, you will see that I have here shapes, tree, and sample. All right, which of course are the two objects we had last time. If I wanted to export this, let's say I want to make this into an image. All right, we do not go to save as. This is a common mistake I see students make. They go to File, Save As, and they go ahead to try and save it as a PNG. But you notice Save As does not have a PNG option. What you need to do instead is go to File, Export. All right, and I usually tell you go right ahead and go to Export As, because that will give you a little bit more control. And you can see the first thing that pops up is PNG. Then we click on Export, choose where we want to put it, hit Save. And now again, if I go to that Downloads folder, you will see here, there's shapes.png. If I double click and open it, there's my image. All right, so the big thing you need to know is this file right here, this PSD, this is for Photoshop. PNG is an actual image file. And we'll talk more about different file types and stuff like that at a different point. But for now, this is just a quick basic overview. And I will see you next time when we actually start making our first set of pixel art.